All right, so let's begin. So today's agenda, we're going to start with a presentation by Dr. Geer from Wake Forest on checklist. This was presented at one of the AUR meetings with a very popular response. And then I'm going to talk about a ACGME APDR project. And then we'll have a moderated discussion with our two program directors on the DEI committee, Carolynn DeBenedectis and Chris Hope. So I'm going to stop sharing and we'll go to Dr. Geer.
All right, can you all see my slides okay, and can you hear me okay? Great. All right, so Nolan asked me to talk about using features of our checklist in the semi-annual review specifically. And, you know, this was back, a group of us from the APDR Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee came up with a 25 item checklist with the idea to have some actionable items for us as program directors to foster an inclusive and equitable learning environment in our programs. And this checklist is housed on the APDR website. These folks were the group, myself with David Pryluck, Carolynn DeBenedectis, and Nolan Kagetsu. Together, the four of us kind of came up with this list and we presented it. And it is, you know, the list is pretty big. I mean, it's not just a list for us to be using in the semi-annual review setting. You know, there's items on it for orientation and items on it for recruitment. But if you look at the list as a whole, there are some specific items that could be good to use in your semi-annual review setting. And, you know, the semi-annual review, while it is, you know, a requirement that that we have to review resident performance, using some of these checklist items, it can also be an avenue to promote inclusive and equitable learning environments. And we're going to present a few of the items that could be repeated every 6 months in these semi-annual reviews. Because again, I think we're all, you know that inclusivity and equity will improve diversity and will maximize our residents' ability to learn. And that's really what we're about here. And we want to maximize the residents' ability to learn. That's what we're here for. And again, not all of the items on our list kind of fit into this setting, but there are a few. And, you know, of course, the ACGME agrees with our efforts in this and, you know, I think appropriately really requires it. You know, I just lifted this, of course, off the ACGME website, and I promise I will not read this wordy, horrible slide. However, I did want to highlight a couple of things on that ACGME common program requirements addressing diversity, equity, inclusion, and that being, you know, you've got to recruit and retain a diverse and inclusive workforce. You need to cultivate an environment where your trainees can raise concerns, and you need to provide, you know, a professional, respectful environment free from discrimination, harassment, abuse, coercion. So, you know, this is the backdrop, and, you know, I think a lot of us are feeling like this right now. You know, the end of June is kind of crazy. Well, actually the whole month of June is kind of crazy. What am I saying? Maybe the month of May and June is kind of crazy. And then the beginning of July is kind of crazy too for program directors. And, you know, paying homage to the Minion movie. If you haven't seen it for wellness, it's really great, even for adults. But, you know, I think as program directors, you know, warning, going to sleep on Sunday will cause Monday, etc. So we're busy people, and these checklists are, provided to help us. And sometimes when you're like, program directors, assistant, associate program directors, we have a lot to do, and lists are good for us. And actually, Nolan kind of hooked me on to Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto, How to Get Things Right. And it's an interesting book that talks about, the effectiveness of having checklists when you're trying to solve complex problems and issues. So with that, we're here to talk about semi-annual review in part. And, again, I don't want to, the reason for the semi-annual review is what's up top. It is a requirement by the ACGME that twice a year, every 6 months, program directors sit down one-on-one with the resident to review their performance following the clinical competency committee's kind of global holistic review of their performance using, a lot of different objective materials and milestones. So we know that is what it is there for. That is the requirement. But I would say that one of the things that I've tried to think about when I'm doing semi-annual reviews is that in some ways it's a little bit of a special time, special kind of one-on-one time with the program directors and the resident. We're all busy, they're busy, we're busy, and you just don't have a lot of that. And this carves out every 6 months, a program director has to sit down with the resident one-on-one. And so while it is a time for us to review their performance in the program, it's also, I would encourage folks to think of it as an opportunity as well to, once you've done sort of the performance review, to discuss resident well-being and to kind of take a moment to kind of show the resident that the program is committed to providing an inclusive and equitable learning environment. And the second part is where our checklist items, I think, can help. So again, I would start with the performance review, maybe finish more with the checklist items. So with that, these are a few items lifted off the big list, which again is on the APDR website. But these are a few items that I think are good to potentially go through. I think it's good to review pronouns. For me, people do this differently. It's easier for me to start introducing my own pronouns, and then, that kind of opens the door for the other person. I think it's a good time to just check in on faith needs, make sure the resident, has what they need. If there's someone that needs a place to pray and meditate at work for their faith, do they have it? Have I provided it? And if not, help with that. I will say number 3, I don't do this every semi-annual review. Okay. I think it's good to do it once. And if you have another setting to do it, that is fine too. But it is good to sort of, open the door for discussion of race, ethnicity, culture. And for me, the easiest way to do that is to start with myself and sort of talk about my own race, culture, ethnicity, background, and then open the door for them. And I think by having this, I don't have this conversation every 6 months in the semi-annual review, but I think it's good to do it once if you don't have another setting you're doing it, because it demonstrates, I have an interest in learning about you, your background, and that's an opportunity for me to show respect and support of that. And I think that's very important to at least have done once. And for some program directors, this is going to be the first time they're going to be able to do it. I think it's also an opportunity to sort of check in on resident health maintenance. Discuss any health needs the resident might have or accommodations for disabilities. I think some folks have heard me talk about a few years ago, I had a resident had very brittle type 1 diabetes, had an insulin pump, and actually had some difficulties with procedures because of peripheral neuropathy. I did not know any of this, I'm mortified to tell you, until he was almost done with his R4 year. And some of that is, I think I was a little nervous to ask about people's health things and, where does HIPAA come in and all. But when I really think back of it, I never gave them a very gracious opportunity to do it either. So I think it's I should have said something to the effect, are there any health needs that you have where I might be able to help your learning environment make things work better for you? And since then I've done that, and then I find out, I have 3 residents, with diabetes, and they said, actually, one of them said it would be helpful to have, a partner with me at night on call, some things like that, that if I hadn't asked the question, I just wouldn't know. And it's also, quickly, you can also just sort of reiterate, you like your trainees to participate in health maintenance, and, make sure that you're, of course, I think we're all trying to provide protected time for health maintenance visits. And for residents, where it's appropriate, pregnant residents with new babies, make sure that, that our lactation rooms and everything are good, and that's all okay. Some additional health and well-being items that you might want to talk about in the semi-annual review is, I think it's good to just review mental health resources in the institution. That way it sort of shows, you support that, you think it's important. And I always bring up the grievance procedures. I just review them twice a year, one-on-one with the residents. As the ACGME common program requirements state, we are supposed to be providing an environment where residents can express concerns. And I think by just quickly reviewing grievance procedures, I think the messaging to the resident or fellows that, we want to hear your concerns. And again, these are all things on the big master checklist, but I think you can kind of add them into a semi-annual review. I think finally, a couple things, I do check in on sort of their physical work environment and equipment things with them. I check, is the lead fitting you? Is everything, do you have, when you get to the interventional services or fluoroscopy, do you have what you need for that? Ensure that you really do have PPE for everyone, for residents with hijabs and turbans, lead for residents of all different sizes. And when it's applicable, I'll review the radiation policy with a pregnant trainee and talk about, use of fetal badges and fluoroscopy. And I'd really take a moment to really encourage them to come to me, if they've got, for any work-related concerns and all. This photo I've shown before, it's just, I'm sometimes a little horrified by it. This is one of our former residents holding up my lead. He's 7 feet tall, and he got here and literally had nothing to fit him in the department. So it's just a reminder that, residents come in all sizes, and, it's just something, the equipment is important to providing an inclusive and effective learning environment. And finally, kind of last checklist item, I do pretty quickly because I kind of house this thing in a packet, if you will. We have it in kind of an electronic format, but it is, I take a moment just to promote the departments and the institution support resources, kind of before they go, talk to them about, what kind of communities, mentorship opportunities we have for our underrepresented medicine trainees, our women in radiology, and LGBTQ resources. And I don't just give these resources to a woman resident or an underrepresented in medicine resident. I give it to everybody. It's for everyone. And I think in doing that, sort of demonstrates the program's support and commitment to everyone. So it's just, again, some things on the list that you can do kind of in a packet format. So, I think the semi-annual review, while it is obviously there to review resident performance every 6 months, I think it's an opportunity to demonstrate support of an inclusive, equitable learning environment. We have groups that are underrepresented in our field of radiology. This is a group of some of our women in radiologists getting a breath of fresh North Carolina air. But again, I think it's set up for that. For those that want, this is the big 25 item list. That, again, some of these items aren't really appropriate for the semi-annual review, and would be used at other times. But I think it has been very helpful to me to try to do better in my own program and also. And finally is the great poet from Wake Forest would say, nothing will work unless you do, says Maya Angelou. And she's also credited with, I've learned that people forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And I think the semi-annual review, I do want residents to leave that at least feeling supported, and that we're looking to provide them with an equitable and inclusive learning environment so that they can grow. So that's where I think the checklist maybe fall into this, and some references for everyone.
Great, thank you so much. And now we'll segue into our APDR Equities Matters project. So as you may know, the ACGME has a so-called Equity Matters. They're developing a curriculum, and they collaborated with the Council of Medical Specialties and Organization of Program Directors, and asked us to sign up for this program to preview their curriculum and actually even do a capstone project. So we signed up for this in July 2021, and we came up with a capstone project, and some background for the project is that in the ACGME data book, for radiology, diagnostic radiology, 14.7% of trainees had unknown race and ethnicity. And this data gets to the data book through the ADS system. So all the PDs, when you have a resident, and you simply just put in the race and ethnicity, and often it's self-identified, and frankly, it's on their ERAS application. So you can, or you can have the conversation as Dr. Geer mentioned in the checklist.
Nolan, sorry to interrupt. Are you supposed to have slides?
I thought I was sharing slides.
No, we only see your desktop currently. Sorry, not to interrupt.
Okay, you know what? Let me try this again. Thank you so much. So the slides weren't that special, but so the background is that about 15% of trainees are of unknown race and ethnicity. And since the total number of URM trainees is under that percent, people will always scratch their head, well, what if we had better data? And so we would encourage all those people on the call to enter this data into the ADS system. And actually, I set a goal of having this number under 10%, and the tiger parent in me would want this, radiology to be the best of all specialties and have less than 1% unknown. We discussed this at I made a presentation at the APDR board. They approved the project in September last year. And I mentioned, for those of you at the APDR business meeting, I mentioned it there as well, and they're giving us this opportunity on the webinar to talk about the project. So it's basically have that conversation. You can just say, on the ERAS application, you self-identified as XYZ, and I just want to confirm, and you can comment on that. And just some random other news. I'm now the APDR liaison to the Radiology Health Equity Committee, and I'm also the ACR Council Steering Committee liaison to APDR and AUR. And with that, we'll go to our Q&A. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you. So Dr. Christopher Ho and I will moderate this. So could you please put any questions you have in the chat for Q&A. I am only seeing the chat. Maybe the Q&A is up here. I see it now. So we have no current questions. So if you put some questions you have in the Q&A or the chat, we can discuss about best practices, how to collect this data, how to use Dr. Geer's checklist, So there's lots of things we're happy to answer questions on to help facilitate people collecting this data, as well as using the checklist to help assess the needs of your diverse residency population.
Well, while we're waiting for questions, I will comment that I've had this discussion with other program directors from other specialties, and some folks are reluctant to even raise this topic because they feel there are legal issues, and it's only a legal issue in the initial interview process. You're not supposed to ask people what their race and ethnicity is because of fear of being discriminated against or whatever. But once they're hired, I think it is a good practice to figure out simple things, or even simple things like, how do you pronounce your name if it's not obvious? And one of our colleagues said that, at the R4 year, the graduation dinner, the resident told the PD that, you've been mispronouncing my name for my whole residency. But finally they couldn't take it and had to let the PD know. And so yikes, right? And so just simple things like that, and I think would mean a lot.
I also think Carol brought up a great point that the semi-annual review is really a place to look for warning signs for things, mental health things, other things like needs of residents that could be based specifically for their cultural or religious needs and things like that. So really, really important to use that effectively and make sure you're reaching the residents and getting them what they need. I have a question. So Dr. Prylock asked, the checklist will be used as a basis for semi-annual review at the PEC level, feeding into the APE and action plan. Exactly. Very good way to use the checklist to uncover some places that you could improve on your action plan.
Regarding checking in on the trainees, I spoke to one program director that said that they were very happy they recruited some URM residents, but then it turned out they weren't thriving, and they kind of missed opportunities to check in with them to make sure that how are you experiencing the program, and make some corrections. They could have made corrections. They eventually made corrections, but they could have made corrections earlier if they kind of checked in. And it kind of goes to that whole notion of I don't see color, and in some ways we should see color, because they say if you don't see color, you don't see racism. And so maybe we should be checking in.
I also think checking in more frequently with at-risk residents. I know parents newly back from leave is a very important group to check in with more frequently. Semi-annually may not be enough. I know I check in with them the day they come back, the week they are back, and then a month when they come back, to make sure that those parents have all that they need, or anyone coming back from a medical leave is another good person to check in with more frequently as well, and not wait for the 6-month annual or semi-annual review. So I think an important thing to take away from this also is, as important as the semi-annual review is, sometimes it's not enough, and there are certain populations who need slightly more frequent check-ins.
Along those lines too, especially for our residents that are parents, at the semi-annual review, I also ask them kind of what their childcare situation is, just to see if we can offer any help or support. The university and the hospital have some pretty good kind of backup healthcare option or backup childcare options if needed. That's always nice too, and checking in from that wellness standpoint. One other comment I was going to make about, just to kind of get everyone kind of excited, or at least ask some more questions here too, is that it can be really tough. I remember doing this in the very beginning about 7 or 8 years ago, and I felt, is it my place to ask these questions? Am I correct, or will they be offended? And the answer is a resounding no. I mean, the residents, they want you to take interest in them, right, outside of work. And I think a lot of great things can come from it. About 8 years ago is when I initially really hesitated, because I was like, is this too intrusive or too invasive? But I asked all the residents, just very generically, have you seen a doctor in the last year? And they were surprised that, number one, I would even care to ask. And again, the numbers were huge. It was like 90% had not seen a doctor. Then that then helped us implement wellness days and the start of that, and writing it up and getting our GME involved in that too for the other residencies. So a lot of good things can come from these, what may seem as very just basic questions, but I think a lot of good initiatives can come from it, and also really strengthen the relationship with your residents.
I agree, Chris, definitely. Opens the dialogue.
The other thing I might add, I think with the semi-annual eval, it's good, I think, to carve out a fair amount of time for those, because you're not gonna be able to get into very much if you're doing 20 minutes, for instance. And I'm not trying to be at all critical of anyone doing 20 minutes. Sometimes that's what you have. But I feel like having a longer semi-eval has actually saved me time in that 6-month period, because I was much more aware of what the resident individually needed. And it took a lot more of, probably double my time in, July and January, right? But it ended up saving, I think, hours and hours. I think, semi-annual review time comes around, and, we're talking about adding some discussions to that, already, pretty, large amount of things that we need to review at the resident. These things off the checklist, I think it will open up some doors that are, at least from my perspective, it's opened some doors that I think would have just remained shut. And I wouldn't have been as helpful as I could, just because I didn't know. But I don't want to, I think you start adding these things, and I'm sure the first thing I would think is, oh my gosh, this is going to add so much time, to these. But I really do feel, having done sort of a longer semi-eval for the last few years, that it is saving me so much time later, for what it's worth.
And you can always run under, right? You can always schedule it for 45 minutes or whatever. And some people might take 20, and then you get some free time to check emails and do stuff. And then some people might need extra time, so you can use some of the extra time from others. So I agree with Carol on that. Feel free to ask best practices. Right before we logged on, we were talking about Nolan had been a program director for 15 years. Carol is a program director for 10. And sounds like Chris and I have both been program directors for about 7 years. So we've got a lot of experience. So if you have a best practices question of how to, please feel free to put that into the chat.
I do have a question for kind of the group. I mean, do you all, for your semi-annual evals, do the assistant or associate PDs do some of those?
Yes, so I actually split it up that I do in the winter evals, I do the first and third years, so that I see the first years for the first time. And then for the spring, I do the second and fourth years. So I do the fourth year's exit interview. And then my APDs, I have two. One will take one of the classes I don't do, and one will take the other. So that's how I do it, Chris. And
same here, having 71, it's not physically possible for me to do all of them. So I do the same thing. The R1s, I do both their winter and their spring. And then same, I do the exit interviews for the R4s. And then our army of associate PDs helps out with the classes in between. And then if the CCC has a resident that's at risk or is running into some issues, then we can typically, I'll do that one or tag team with one of the associate PDs, so they don't feel kind of ganged up on, so they have someone kind of like as a support for them. And along those lines too, for those residents that we are at risk or remediation, undergoing remediation, not only we come up a plan together, I try to get them a mentor that's kind of outside, that's just not myself, so they feel like they have an ally. It could be someone within the residency education team or someone outside the residency education team as well.
Another good reason to do it. So I have a small program unlike Chris, and I still do it. And the reason I do it is you're not always there, and it's really good for another person to know what's going on with the residents, right? So it's a good way for the APDs to know what's going on. So if you're not there, you're on vacation or something, that the residents have a different type of relationship with them, other than like they're a name of person on a paper that really doesn't do much except interview, during interview season.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do it the same way. I partly threw that question out just in case programs weren't using their APDs to help with that, because I think that's huge. For one, it's going to allow everybody to do a longer one. And I think those longer ones, I mean, I have to admit, I use in those semi-annual evals, I use the word feedback probably 1 billion times. Partly because so that they know this is a big feedback mechanism for them. But I think by spreading it out, I do agree. I think it's good. It's just good because not everybody, I might be not the best person for them to all talk to either. And it just gets them a relationship with the APDs as well. But I think that allows you to do a longer semi-annual eval because you don't, quite frankly, have to do as many. So I was just kind of throwing that out there to see for best practices. I think that's a good thing to do. And I didn't do that at the beginning. I thought, oh, well, I guess I have to do them all because I'm the program director, when I first started out. And then I was like, oh my gosh, what am I thinking? And I found that's just a good practice.
I suppose one of the advantages of the checklist is, in fact, the whole process is semi-standardized. And so when somebody else kind of goes through the questions, the PD may talk to the APD about this is what we mean by this. And then, the residents don't feel they're gypped by not speaking to the PD because they kind of get relatively the same experience. So that could be helpful in a larger program. I think my program was relatively smaller and I did probably the great majority of them.
And I will say that we do have the residents sign the checklist that we went over. And probably a lot of people, of course, are doing that, but I think that's, it actually is a checklist and we do have them sign it, which kind of, as Nolan said, it does make sure that all three of us, me and the APDs are kind of going over the same material.
For some of the people online, Nolan, Carolynn, and also a plug to the APR website. Do we have the checklist on the website now? I can't remember.
I think, did we put it in the DEI curriculum, Nolan? I think we did. I think it's part of the DEI curriculum. Is it, Carol? Am I correct?
I can try to find the link.
And
yes,
we do. Yes. Yeah. And we'll also send it out with the write-up. We'll send a summary of this and we can send it out with the summary as well.
And again, the checklist, the whole checklist is 25 items. And again, it's got other, I think, really helpful things for your orientation for recruitment and sort of departmental efforts for inclusive, equitable learning environment. But we just pulled out the pieces that might be good to add to your semi-annual review if you're not already using them.
Oh, is there something in the chat? Hold on one second. Oh, wonderful. Well, I don't want to hold people up too long. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Any questions or anything? If some topics don't take the full hour, this could be one of them. So just any last minute. Oh, there's the link to the DEI curriculum. Please copy that down and the checklist is there if you want it before the summary comes out in the next few weeks.
Hey, Nolan, I just want to double check that I understood this part right. So when we're entering our ADS, in August,
Yes.
that's when you want us, or that's when for this project, you want that information entered, correct?
Yes. I mean, you can enter it now because I think essentially they close it at a certain point. So yeah, enter that. Make sure everyone's field is entered correctly, and that you could argue it's relatively simple, but like many simple things, it's
not simple. So Nolan, I'm sure you won't mind. I will put my email and your email address on the summary in case people have questions of anything about the ADS, how to enter it so that we can hopefully make it successful.
sounds good.
Wonderful. What day I want
And
to,
where is the exact link to the checklist on the web page? I was having trouble finding that.
I can do a screenshot map of it for people. I'm not at I can't access it right now. But
Okay.
I'll do a screenshot of it so people can find it. But it should be there. If not, I'm going to send the whole checklist in the summary. And we can
Okay.
always add it. Wonderful.
Good.
Well, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Dr. Kagetsu, Dr. Geer, and Dr. Ho for being such fantastic panelists and co-moderators. And thank you everyone who attended. Please feel free to contact us with any questions. Bye, everyone.
Stay safe, everyone.